All right, good afternoon, everyone. We'll call to order the regular meeting of the City of Murfreesboro Board of Zoning Appeals for November 23rd, 2020. Consistent with the governor's orders, we will be conducting portions of this meeting electronically. One of our board members, Julie King, will be joining us via Zoom. Next item is a determination of a quorum. 5 members are on the board. We have 3 present, along with Ms. King, so I believe we have fulfilled that requirement. The next item is a consideration of the minutes from our regular meeting on September 23rd, 2020. Those minutes have been provided to board members. Are there any changes necessary to those?
No, sir. Seeing none.
No.
Okay. Hearing none, those minutes will stand as approved. We'll now move on to new business. We've got 2 applications, both special use permits. The first one is application Z20031 by Mr. Lyle Lynch of Johnson & Bailey Architects for Calvary Baptist Church. They are requesting a special use permit in order to expand an existing institutional group assembly use, in this case a church, for property located in an RS-15 zone at 431 DeJarnett Lane. Mr. Brad Barbie, will you review this application for us?
Good morning, Chairman Davis and members of the Board of Zoning Appeals. The first item on today's agenda is Calvary Baptist Church, and as you mentioned, they are requesting a special use permit in order to expand an institutional group assembly use, which is a church at 431 DeJarnett Lane. The church is located on the north side of DeJarnett Lane, just adjacent or just northeast to the SportsCom facility, as well as across the street from Providence Christian Academy and Northwood subdivision. The church originally received a preliminary special use permit for the operation of a church in 2002, and as their plans developed, they were able to obtain a regular special use permit in 2003. In 2004, they came through with an additional permit, which was granted, and that was to operate a daycare and a private school on the property. This was a short-term use. Providence Christian Academy was housed at this location temporarily. The properties around the existing site, to the east is a large tract of land located outside the city limits with a single family home on it. The property to the north of the area identified on the cover map is also owned by the church, which is currently vacant. And the properties to the west, you have Bradford Place subdivision and another single family property along that same property line. The proposal includes building expansions on both the west and north sides of the existing building, along with a drop-off area, a solid waste enclosure, and a parking lot addition on the west. You'll notice in the handouts that I presented briefly before the meeting, the layout of the site has changed slightly. Instead of removing the existing parking spaces in front of the church and constructing a new parking lot, those will remain now, and they are going to locate a new parking lot between the church and the western property line. This is consistent with their original master plan that they submitted and got approved for phase 1 of their property. In their letters, they have addressed all the standards of general applicability and the additional standards for the institutional group assembly uses. Everything appears to be in order. If the board does approve this request, staff would like to recommend the following conditions of approval. That a site plan shall be submitted to the planning department for review and approval prior to the issuance of a building permit. The site plan submittal shall include civil plans, landscape plan, photometric lighting plan, and building elevations, and any other plans necessary to demonstrate compliance with the zoning ordinance and design guidelines. The second condition would be that the solid waste enclosure must be constructed as a component of this expansion and shall be of masonry construction and designed and constructed to meet the minimum requirements of the zoning ordinance and design guidelines. The third condition we'd like is that the existing gravel parking and maneuvering areas shall be removed and restored to a green condition prior to the issuance of certificate of occupancy. I believe the applicant representative, Mr. Lynch, is here if you have any questions, and I'm also available if I can provide assistance.
Thank you. Any questions for staff at this point?
No, sir.
No.
Anything the applicant would like to add? Okay. Any questions for the applicant? Don't hear any. At this time, we'll conduct a public hearing. Anyone present wishing to speak for or against this application, if you'd come forward and give us your name and address. Seeing none, we'll declare the public hearing closed and open the floor for any further discussion or motion.
Mr. Chairman, this is Julie. My new neighbor is the new pastor at Calvary, and since we have a quorum without me, I would prefer not to take part in this one, even though I don't think it'll be an issue.
Okay. Okay, we'll make a note of that.
Mr. Chairman, I would like to make a motion that we approve this special use permit subject to the conditions outlined in the staff recommendation. In my view, it meets all the standards that it needs to as far as the neighborhood, the immediate use, the current use, and the proposed use should not be of any detriment to any of the other areas around it. So,
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Mr. Blomley, if you would call the roll for us.
Thank you, Chairman Young. And I'll go ahead. I don't know if we have Mr. Halliburton online yet. Mr. Halliburton, can you answer me?
I'm here. Sorry.
Okay, great. Thank you. So I'll go ahead and call the roll. And Ms. King, when I call your name, if you wouldn't mind just stating abstain.
Yes, sir.
So we'll start with Ms. King. Ms. King?
Abstain.
Vice Chairman Halliburton? Vice Chairman Halliburton?
Aye.
Ms. Foy?
Aye.
Mr. Tips?
aye.
Chairman Young?
Aye.
Thank you.
All right, that motion's passed. Appreciate your time. The next item on our agenda is application Z20032 by Mr. J. Jackson for Mr. Mahesh Patel. They're requesting a special use permit in order to establish an accessory apartment for property located in a residential single-family RS-15 zone, and this is for property at 911 Springleaf Court. Mr. Barbie, if you'd review this one for us.
Well, again, thank you again, Chairman Young. The application before you is by Mr. Patel, and he's requesting a special use permit in order to establish an accessory apartment in a residential single-family zone. The property is at 911 Springleaf Court and is, again, same area of town. This is on the south side of DeJarnett Lane and on Springleaf Court in the North Spring subdivision. This is probably within a mile of the previous application. Surrounding properties are all similarly zoned as a residential single-family 15. Back in March of 2020, a building permit was issued for the construction of a new single-family dwelling at this site. During the inspection phase, it was identified that a second kitchen was being added into what would usually be a rear covered patio space. After identifying that, we contacted the property owner, reached out to them, and made them aware of the process in order to gain approval for it. It's our understanding that this is not necessarily to be a second apartment or an accessory apartment, but it is to be a second kitchen, a full kitchen for cooking. The gentleman, and this has been brought before the board previously in other subdivisions, where they'll do some heavy cooking that might have cooking odors or cooking scents that they would not want to extend through the entire home. So that way they'll have a kitchen inside and a kitchen for the heavier cooking that's somewhat isolated away from the main home. This applicant has submitted the proper application. They've addressed all the standards of general applicability and the additional standards. We do ask that if the board approves this request, that we'll have 3 conditions of approval that we would like to request. and that's that electrical, gas, and other applicable permits must be obtained for the completion of the second kitchen, that any direct connection, such as a doorway from the second kitchen to an adjacent master bedroom area, will first require an amendment to this special use permit. Depending on the square footage of the combined area, a variance to the maximum square footage of 700 square feet may also be required, and that a deed restriction must be recorded stating that the accessory apartment will not be used as a rental unit to non-family members, and it will be used in a manner consistent with the zoning regulations for accessory apartments. I believe the applicant, Mr. Jay Jackson, is he available? Is he here? Yep. He is in attendance to answer any questions that the board may have, and I am also available as well.
Thank you.
And Chairman Young, I just wanted to add, before Mr. Jackson speaks, I just wanted to add that to what Mr. Barbie said, that this is an unusual situation. It's not being designed explicitly to be an accessory apartment. However, in a single-family home, when we have a second kitchen, that kind of begins to mimic what a second dwelling unit might contain. And when we look at the floor plan for this, if there is, as Mr. Barbie mentioned, a door cut between the second kitchen and one of the adjacent master suites, it has everything that would be required to create an independent dwelling unit. So while we are fully aware, Mr. Jackson and Mr. Patel have been very clear, and we appreciate them giving us the information that it is not intended to be used as a second dwelling unit. It has the potential for that, and this is a good way, one, to make them aware of our expectations, and to also get something on the record as to how this particular portion of the home can be used consistent with our regulations. So I thought that required a little bit of extra explanation, just because it is an unusual situation, and Mr. Barbie and myself are here if you have any questions regarding the reason why they're here for this.
Mr.
Chairman.
Blomley? Oh, excuse me, Mr. Tips. You go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Question, I guess, for both. Maybe more of a comment. I don't see that it meets that definition so much, and I think it's a big stretch for us to make that assumption that this is an accessory apartment. Given the design, you've got a one-story single-family home, 3-bedroom design. You know, you have this sunroom that, just for a conversion, is, you know, the only rear entry to the dwelling. As a background in appraising, I don't even see that accessory apartment use, by definition, would be a financially feasible enterprise. I think it's a big stretch to suggest that they would want to make this, do the conversions necessary, when it would take away, under y'all's illustration, you would take this large dwelling and change it from essentially a single-family unit with 3 bedrooms down to actually a 2-bedroom unit with an accessory. And I just don't see how that. I'm not really sure why this is even here in the first place.
Well, we thought this would be preferable to as opposed to prohibiting them from having the second kitchen.
I don't see how we can prohibit them from having that kitchen. You know, if it says here, accessory apartment is for food prep, sanitation, and sleeping, really the only thing that you're doing is allowing them to have a sunroom that has a kitchen in it. Or by extension, what if they were to, instead of this being a sunroom, if that was a patio, they could have an outdoor kitchen, could they not?
Yes,
So I just don't see why it's here.
Okay. I understand.
My questions were consistent with Mr. Tips, but I was more eager to understand what the determination was, because the definition is listed as an accessory apartment for food preparation, sanitation, and sleeping. Within the review by staff, it specifically has a contingency that would make it an accessory apartment if the second kitchen were to be combined with one of the 2 adjacent master suites. My question is, would we not have to inspect if that kind of construction was to occur on this property?
I'm sorry, Ms. King, could you repeat that question?
Well, the staff comment is that if a second kitchen were to be combined with one of the two adjacent master suites, that would require one or two internal walls to be constructed where there are doors nailed, and a door to be constructed on another portion of the building internally. If that's the case, then wouldn't the city be coming in for building permits for that much construction in this building?
I believe if they were cutting a door, that a permit would be required.
So if that kind of permitting would be required in the future in order to create a space where there is entrance between this kitchen and a bedroom, would we not be on alert to that they're creating a space that is more consistent with a accessory apartment?
Yes, if they got a permit, that is correct.
And I just think that's with Ms. King also. I think that's it. There's a big if here, and that's a if they were to do it. That's clearly wouldn't be, as I said before, I don't think in comparison to what is, physically feasible, what is, of course, we're here to determine legally permissible, but financially feasible for someone to make this type of accessory apartment with a property of this type in that neighborhood. I think the impact of that from a valuation standpoint would not be the prudent thing to do. And for us to sit here and say, this is what they did, this is what they were planning, they have very good reasons for what they're doing and very understandable. And I'm thinking, I'm not sure just because we had an inspector go out there and see that this kitchen's under construction, while we make the leap to say that could be an accessory apartment, I just don't agree with.
Well, it has all of the elements, and there's nothing that says the accessory apartment has to be totally separate from the rest of the dwelling unit. So it has all of the elements to make it stand alone as a separate accessory apartment. Adding that second kitchen has been the benchmark for years and years and years. I've been here almost 20 years, has been the benchmark for what we would consider a second dwelling unit. We did the same thing back in 2012 or 2013 with a house on Avellino Circle. I don't recall there being any objection to us bringing that before the board. That second kitchen is what we consider the benchmark for adding a second dwelling unit, because you could take almost any configuration of the home from that point and make it into a separate dwelling unit. So, we didn't take this decision lightly. And usually when the range is proposed to be added, we try to be reasonable. If someone is just adding a wet bar, adding a sink and a dishwasher, a fridge, we don't like giving people more work or costing them more time or money than they have to be. But when that second kitchen goes in there, I think it's our duty to protect the integrity of the single-family neighborhood. And we've seen it numerous times where people will go in after the fact or go in without permits, because we say that when someone gets a permit, and it may not be Mr. Patel, it could be a successive property owner. People don't always get permits when they're supposed to. That's one thing that I've learned in my 20 years here, is that people do things without seeking permission. And so, one, it has all of the elements of an accessory apartment, and two, we don't want to set it up to be used as in a manner that is inconsistent with what the zoning regulations would allow. And so, what we've tried to do is, we understand what Mr. Jackson and Mr. Patel are wanting to do is very reasonable. We tried to create a path by which we felt comfortable with them getting there, and so that's how we arrived at the point we are at today. And if that needs any additional clarification, I'm happy to.
We've had some times and previously where going through this process has helped the neighbors that are around a piece of property like this calm their fears. Sometimes people come to speak of these, and sometimes they don't. That's always kind of hard to gauge, but it's been worth the process in other applications to make sure that this is, whether it's overkill this time, that's, I guess, a matter of opinion, but it served us in past instances of this type of application.
And Mr. Tibbs, I assure you, I can see your point. We don't want to do anything that is overburdening on the property owners. We certainly don't.
Just for the
Ballmer,
record, I wasn't on the board when that was done. And since I've been on the board, I don't recall another one quite like this, and that's why I'm making these strong comments.
Sure.
I don't see anything at all from an exterior, how it's affecting design, for them to do what they're doing, how it's affecting other neighbors by what they're doing. And so I just think it's a big leap for us to take this big stand on the if they were to do X. So that's where I stand. That's the last I'll say on it.
Okay.
Understand. Thank you.
I agree, Mr. Tibbs. I think maybe perhaps the language in the staff comments are particularly of concern in this instance, given the fact that it is staff's belief, according to you, Mr. Blomley, that all the elements are met. The language within the agenda doesn't say that. It's a contingency that they're met. And that is cause for concern when it comes to whether or not we should be pursuing this. Because there's a difference between whether everything's met and everything's met if certain action occurs. I do not recall that past event specifically. I don't remember having had anything come before me that would require as much construction in order to meet that. Additionally, it's concerning to me that we're only using the square footage of the kitchen sunroom area to determine whether this is appropriate, when in order for it to meet all the requirements of an accessory structure, we would have to include the second master bedroom and bathroom. So I don't understand how we're making the determination with regard to that space.
I think because it could be divided in numerous ways, we don't have a specific square footage to compare with the 700 square feet. And when I say that it has all the elements for an accessory apartment, it does. But I mean, I think we've been clear that it's not being set up to be used that way. And I think that if it is set up to be used that way, so in my opinion, it does have those elements, but we want to be able to revisit it in the future if structural modifications are made to make it formally used as one.
There you go.
Okay. Thank you for that.
Thank you, Matthew. Any further questions for staff? Or Mr. Jackson, do you have anything you want to add to the application?
I don't know that I'm going to be able to add anything substantively, but I do think it's important that I kind of let the board know. I think y'all raised some really interesting questions, and I'm pretty confident that I can make a pretty compelling argument to a court if I needed to that this process is not necessary. But with all that said, I'm kind of reminded of that saying, he who has the gold makes the rules. And so we were presented in a situation of Mr. Patel has a kitchen. He wants to do it. He wants to cooperate with the city. He wants to cooperate with planning. He wants to cooperate with codes. And when we looked at it and evaluated it, it appeared to me that the process they wanted us to go through, we felt like we could get it approved. Plus, we felt like it was the quickest way to accomplish the goal, which is for him to get a certificate of occupancy right now he's got a temporary CO subject to this. So without some resolution here, he still has his temporary CO, so it's got to be resolved. So we felt like this was the quickest way to get to that point. I've know many of these lawyers here. Y'all are smart people. You make some good arguments. How you want to handle it's fine. We'll take it from there, whatever you think. I will say that he has no intention on making this into an apartment. That's for darn sure. You can look at the layout and you can kind of tell that's the case. And he is absolutely comfortable with those restrictions that the staff wants.
Thank you. Do you have any questions for the applicant?
Yeah,
Sorry, Jay. You mind?
Mr. Jackson, what percentage, what stage of completion is the house?
I think it's, David, it's a temporary CO as he moved, and I should say, Mr. Maurice Ludlam, who is a general contractor, is here, in addition to the homeowner, Mr. Patel, and they might be able to answer that better than I can.
It's 100%.
It's 100% done, I think.
Except for whatever's going to end up happening with this.
Yes, so it's 100% finished, and we have a temporary CO, and I think the only limitation in that temporary CO is this process.
Thank you.
All right, I think we're done.
Okay.
Thank you, Jay. At this time, we'll conduct a public hearing. Is there anyone present that wishes to speak for or against this application? Seeing none, we'll declare the public hearing closed and open the floor for any further discussion or motion.
I have one more question for staff. Why is the deed restriction necessary if this area is already zoned single family?
Ms. Foy, and obviously any of the recommended conditions are at your discretion whether or not to include or not include those. That is a standard condition that we've included for years with special use permits for accessory apartments. It's pure, the purpose is purely to put future owners on notice that it cannot be converted into something other than what the zoning regulations would allow. But you know, whether or not y'all choose to include that or any of the other conditions as a condition of approval is purely at your discretion.
Thank you.
Any further questions or someone would like to?
Chairman Young, this is Ken Halliburton. Can you hear me?
Yes.
So I would say that there's been arguments made on both sides that we can all either agree on or disagree on. I do think that the purpose in this, as Matthew described, is warranted. Now, whether it's warranted in this particular case or not, you know, again, I think that's up for argument, but I think the process is good to safeguard people in a particular neighborhood, and in this question, in this neighborhood. So I'm going to make a motion that we approve subject to all staff comments and conditions.
Have a motion. Is there a second?
Despite my concerns, I understand Mr. Jackson's client's needs, and I second because I also understand the city's concern of having additional oversight with regard to this property with any future homeowners. So I make a second, despite my questions.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Mr. Blomley?
Vice Chairman Halliburton,
Aye.
Ms. King,
Aye.
Ms. Foy,
Aye.
Mr. Tips,
Abstain.
and Chairman Young.
Aye.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. That application's been approved. Appreciates everybody's time and contributions to that application. The next item on our agenda is staff reports and other business. Look at the shade note.
I have some other business I'd like to point out. I've got a special guest here today. Over there in that blue blazer, that's my daughter Grace. So she's here observing since she's out of school this week. So appreciate her being here, and she made sure to put the BZA uniform on, which is a blazer, to attend the meeting. So I just wanted to thank her for being here and watching over us closely.
Good deal. Yeah, good to have you. Anything else?
Move we adjourn.
Hope everyone has a nice Thanksgiving.
Thank you.
We will adjourn.
Thank you.